In recent days, major export hubs along China's coast, including Guangdong, Shanghai, and even Hong Kong, have seen freight operations come to a near standstill. Many shipments bound for the U.S. were rushed onto vessels in a race to depart before the tariffs were enforced.
Tariffs against China add up to 145%.
Is America heading towards a recession?
The Dow's down more than 1,000 points as that global sell-off intensifies.
We're in uncharted, unprecedented uncertainty.
I think it could get worse if we don't make some progress here.
Increased trade with China boosted the annual purchasing power of the average U.S. household by $1,500 between 2000 and 2007. Second, exports from China supported over 1 million jobs in the United States, or about 0.5% of the entire civilian workforce.
This is Drew, and I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of Real Talk Today. Today, I want to talk about some of these tariffs that's going on and make sure that my audience has a pretty good understanding of how things could end up in the next few months. Those tariffs really affect our everyday living as far as what we buy and how much we have to pay for it. And with that being said, 50-50 may be the only way to go. Let's talk.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into...
But after the U.S. announced a 125% tariff, Shanghai's once busy export activity came to a sudden stop within days.
Even though a lot of these headlines have seemingly appeared out of nowhere, the reality is, over the last 40 years, China has been at the forefront of production, international investment, and rapid productivity, all because of an exchange that occurred back in 1979, which gave China diplomatic relations with the United States. Countries from around the world invested their money in Chinese infrastructure, they took advantage of low-cost labor, and they helped bring much-needed funding to areas that were previously closed off. In fact, China's growth was so impressive that in 2001, they became a member of the World Trade Organization as a way to help further strengthen ties with the United States. But it didn't exactly go as planned. For the United States, it became quickly apparent that demand for low-cost, cheap goods was increasing way faster than expected. More and more products were being outsourced elsewhere, and corporations moved 6 million jobs overseas to allow for higher profits. Now, even though this certainly did bring down the cost of nearly everything that we use today, for China, the benefits were monumental. With all of the worldwide trade and foreign investment, 400 million people were lifted from poverty. In addition to that, their economy is now 11 times larger today than it was in 2001. They became the world's largest exporting nation in 2009, and they were even touted as the world's economic miracle while they grew at a faster pace than any other nation. However, not everything was exactly as it appeared on the surface, because the more China grew, the more powerful they became in relation to every other nation. The more leverage they had within their own businesses to control them, the more they could change policy in any way that they deemed fit, and the more difficult they'd become to join forces with. In fact, members of the World Trade Organization allege that China's been providing illegal state subsidies to businesses who export their products, discriminating against companies who don't buy from Chinese manufacturers, and controlling supply chains through taxing raw materials. Even worse, it said that they've been devaluing their own currency by as much as 40% as an incentive for other countries to buy their goods at a discount.
Now, I want to give a shout out to Stephen Graham. He's another YouTuber that's very good. I want him to kind of give us an introduction on how intertwined we are with China as opposed to our day-to-day living and the prices we pay for goods and services. And we really need to understand, even though some of the tariff may be deemed necessary, it's going to hurt us just as much as it's going to hurt them. It's going to hurt them on the manufacturing side, since they can produce a lot of these products that we crave as Americans a lot cheaper. But it's going to hurt us because it's not going to be any market. We're not going to have any money basically to buy the stuff that they're trying to sell, especially if the tariffs keep getting so high and people keep losing jobs. They're not going to be able to buy anything anyway.
For years, Apple has been diversifying its manufacturing supply chain away from China. Apple's been selling iPhones made in India, AirPods from Vietnam, and Mac computers assembled in Malaysia. The strategy was a hedge for its supply chain after the company dealt with tariffs by the first Trump administration, supply chain issues tied to COVID, and chip shortages that revealed the risk the company was at by primarily producing out of China. But then on April 2nd, everything changed.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world.
Apple is still very reliant on China. Around 90% of iPhones are still assembled in China by Foxconn, which accounts for roughly 80% of Apple's total production capacity. China also handles 55% of Mac assembly and 80% of iPads. So what exactly do these tariffs mean for your iPhone? And what options does Apple have?
Apple is in the eye of the storm. I don't think any company is more impacted by this tariff Armageddon than Apple. It's 90% of iPhones, 75% of its other hardware. And that's why for Apple, when it comes to China and Taiwan, this continues to be just an epic disaster. And that's why the stock's reflecting that.
Right now, Apple designs its products in the US, but assembles almost everything abroad.
The reality is, if you want an iPhone made in the US and you want that for $3,500, we should make it in the US. If you want it for $1,000, you keep it in China.
He said basically it's just too much, the price of making these goods is just so much cheaper in China. And a lot of it is really due to the infrastructure and how much they actually pay, their citizens to make it. Said if you wanted to keep an iPhone around $1,000, you get it made somewhere like China. If you want to be $3,000, you bring it to America, because as we all know, Americans want more per hour. We're not going to work for peanuts.
The Trump White House claims Apple could just bring iPhone production back to the US.
We have the labor, we have the workforce, we have the resources to do it. And as you know, Apple has invested $500 billion here in the United States. So if Apple didn't think the United States could do it, they probably wouldn't have put up that big chunk of change.
But experts say that's easier said than done.
The global supply chain's built in Asia. China has been a linchpin for Apple's success, as well as big tech. And look, to put some numbers, it would take $30 billion, 3 years, for Apple to just move 10% of the supply chain to the US. You could produce things in Asia that's 95% cheaper than in the US. That's the nature of the global supply chain. Whether it's clothes, electronics, U.S. consumers want things cheap. It's labor cost, infrastructure, the nature of the workforce. It takes 4 to 5 years to build a factory. So where does Apple go in the meantime? They can't just call a factory in the U.S. Look, essentially Apple, their boat has been turned upside down. There's no life rafts. And it's a very, very dangerous and I think uncertain time.
Amid fierce back and forth tariffs between the US and China, as of April 10th, the White House told CNBC Trump elevated tariffs to a staggering 145% on Chinese imports.
It's going to throw the US into a recession.
Okay, at the beginning, I did want to touch on the iPhone, whatnot, iPad, a lot of the Apple products that we all love and use. Because, let's be real, a lot of it's some of the best stuff on the market for certain type of situations. So I just wanted to make sure we understand how interwoven we are with the Chinese economy. But China is going to be suffering also because they need to manufacture these, especially when you selling something cheap. You need to manufacture and sell a whole lot of it just to, maintain a slim margin.
Carnage, panic, bloodbath doesn't even begin to cut it.
Chinese markets deep in the red. Now Hong Kong stocks plunged the most in almost 3 decades.
In its first day of trading after the weekend, the Shanghai Composite fell more than 7 percentage points. That's, let's call it somewhere in the ballpark of $500 billion in value, wiped out in one day. The Hang Seng, a measure of top stocks in the Hong Kong market, that was down more than 13%. That's another few $100 billion in value gone. And Donald Trump's not done. Because on top of a 10% tariff on Chinese goods imposed in February, plus another 10% in March, plus 34% announced last week, he's just threatened an additional 50%, which altogether effectively doubles the import cost of all Chinese goods to the US.
Tonka trucks, Care Bears, Lincoln Logs, Tinker Toys, Light Bright. And as with most of the toy business, we make the overwhelming majority of our product in China. China, has a tremendous workforce, and not only a tremendous workforce, but They've invested in the infrastructure to create a toy manufacturing supply chain.
Because of China tariffs during Trump's first term, Foreman says a lot of toy manufacturing has moved to Vietnam, Mexico, and India in the last 5 years.
The interesting part there is that most of the factories that operate in places, toy factories anyway, that operate in places like Vietnam, India, and Mexico are owned by Chinese anyway. So you're sort of not escaping doing business with the Chinese.
It's been crazy.
This is one of the most amazing pieces of technology, and this thing is made in China. And whether you're making a Tonka truck in China or an Apple iPhone, they figured it out.
Almost all electronics that U.S. consumers like to buy are fabricated in China. The vast majority of textiles are milled in China, whether the apparel is actually put together in China or not.
Other categories, like teas, can't easily be grown in the U.S. because of the climate.
You need high humidity. Usually you need to be at a very high altitude, and those things only come together in certain parts of the world. Like the green teas that we use are only really grown in coastal China. The black teas are grown in India.
Baltimore-based Zest makes high caffeine teas. About half of its $3 to $4 million of annual sales happen on Amazon.
It's those components that are the most troubling. Of you don't really have a U.S. option, and just you have to pass on the cost eventually.
Hey, good morning, Michael. I mean, when it comes to groceries, economists project that if consumers are made to absorb the entirety of the 20% import tariffs on Europe, things like this, olive oil from Italy, $20 now, it'll be up to $24. And something else that folks are really not gonna like, alcohol could also rise by that 20% as well. But not just imported alcohol from Europe, but also domestically produced alcohol because of the tariffs on aluminum and on glass.
We're starting to get to the point where if all these are applied, you effectively create an embargo between the two countries where there's just going to be no trade.
Trump is punishing China for hitting back. In a trade war, the U.S. has escalated. Yesterday, Trump says China issued retaliatory tariffs of 34%. If China does not withdraw its 34% increase, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50% effective April 9th. But China has found a way to hit the U.S. back hard, and not just with tariffs, but by attacking its supply chain directly.
They just threw down the gauntlet.
It's now a game of chicken. It's who's going to blink first.
China is messaging this quite clearly. They are in it until the end.
This thing keeps escalating because, you know, you heard what Trump said. He is reciprocal. They add a tax, he's going to add a tax. They add a tariff, he's going to add a tariff. This thing could go on and on and on. And if somebody doesn't say uncle at some point, this thing could actually lead to war. And I don't think a lot of people really understand, you know, the significance of, you know, what's really going on right now. A lot of these Chinese companies going to go out of business, and I can pretty much guarantee you, you know, a country's not going to let themselves go bankrupt over another country without a fight.
On April 6th, a female owner of a laser cutting factory, Liu Ting, posted a video saying that manufacturing in China is going to get even harder, and she plans to sell off her 30,000-watt equipment.
是的，你们没有听错，我可能要把去年4月份买的大图的激光要准备出掉了。
Yes, you heard me right. I might have to sell the laser equipment I bought last April. I don't need to explain. You could probably guess why.
Today is April 10th. U.S. tariffs have surged to a staggering 145%. Many friends running OEM factories for American brands told me all their U.S. orders were canceled. Even completed goods are being rejected, and shipments that already reached the port are being pulled back. Some shameless clients are even demanding their deposits back. When disaster hits, it's always the factories left holding the bag. No client is willing to shoulder the burden of these tariffs, and none of them care whether the factory has already paid for the materials. Clients may lose a small deposit, but the losses for factories go far beyond that.
More and more companies will go bankrupt, lay off workers, and downsize. Many manufacturing owners will end up with insufficient funds and will not survive.
But China knows hitting the U.S. back with tariffs doesn't land quite the same way as the original blow against China. The trade math illustrates why. If we're talking about the physical things the two countries ship back and forth, in 2024, the U.S. sold China just over $140 billion worth of goods, but it bought almost $440 billion of product, meaning A 34% tariff on Chinese goods, that has a bigger impact than that same tariff going the other way. China has, until now, attempted to exercise restraint. Months ago, when Trump first imposed that sweeping 10% tariff on Chinese goods coming into the US, China did retaliate, but with smaller sector-specific tariffs, mainly targeting US energy, coal, LNG, that sort of thing. Then, when the US stacked another 10% tariff on China, once again, we saw a measured response, this time against US agriculture, targeting very specific things like chicken and beef.
But economists say the folks that will start to feel the pinch the soonest are low-income families, Rob.
This morning, some Americans are playing a game of chicken with prices.
If you got an Amazon order waiting in your cart, just go ahead and buy it.
Wait too long, those shoes you've been eyeing could get 18% more expensive. And that sweater you had in your cart, 17% pricier. And with 104% tariffs hitting China overnight, smartphone prices could also soar, with one estimate predicting an iPhone 16 Pro Max, already $1,200, could jump by another $350.
Each country, is basically trying to impose their will, but sooner or later it's going to have to come to a point where, enough is enough. And I just want to make sure that you all understand that these tariffs, what a lot of people don't really pay attention to what's actually going on, but it's going to affect basically everything that we consume in the U.S. Real quick, let's take a look and see how it's starting to affect American businesses, because a lot of the stuff that we sell over here, like we talked about before, made in China.
This is our new Snacktainer silicone bento box.
Kenny's brand, Prima Stella, brings in about $800,000 annually, almost entirely from Amazon sales.
I would love to be able to manufacture in the U.S., but the truth is that the infrastructure is not there. The manufacturing infrastructure doesn't exist. I've even considered what it would look like to open a manufacturing site, but that's way over my head and, out of my budget, right?
Even with huge tariffs, Kenny says it still doesn't make financial sense to move manufacturing to the U.S.
The cost is too high. It's not 10% or 20% higher. It's double or triple the cost per product. Right now, when you do try to reach out to manufacturers that are here, they don't even return your calls or your emails. The people in China are hungry for the work. They'll get back to you right away. They make sure you get your shipments right away. They're on it. I think the administration would like people to think that this is a China problem and that this is only hurting Chinese-based businesses and helping U.S.-based businesses. But I am a US-based business, let's be clear. I can't manufacture everything here. I wish that I could, but everything else is done here. Everything's warehoused here, designed here, photographed here. All the income that comes from that stays here.
All those costs of doing business in the US add up quickly.
And those costs are different than they are, say, in China. And so when you have the factory directly knocking off a product and sending it right to Amazon and not paying tariffs, we can't compete.
I had that initial wave of panic.
Marissa Hibbert stocked up on cosmetics, many made abroad.
Tell me about what you bought ahead of the tariffs taking effect.
I really decided to make the deliberate decision to stock up on what is most meaningful to my day-to-day life. So that means facial cleansers, skincare, moisturizers, sunscreen, all the things that we need before we walk out the house in the beginning of the day.
Because it could get more expensive.
Because it absolutely could get more expensive.
Americans are hitting the store for basic necessities too.
Take a trip to Costco. Get some emergency supplies. Stock up on some things.
Even billionaires like Mark Cuban say it's time to buy necessities from toothpaste to soap, bringing back memories of the toilet paper stashing during the pandemic.
I need to understand why.
Stocking up before tariff-driven prices isn't a bad idea, especially for products like coffee and rice, which are largely not made in the U.S. But experts warn, keep your cool. Try to buy only what you need for groceries.
The video's getting a little long, but I thought that this is something that, really need to be brought to the channel, because I don't think a lot of people are really paying attention to exactly what's going on. Because as of this moment, we're not really, as consumers, feeling the biggest hit of what these tariffs are going to bring in the future. But I want you to understand that, You know, you definitely need to try to keep the essentials, you know, close by and whatnot, but try not to buy a whole lot of stuff that you really don't need. But I don't think it's any reason to stock up on toilet paper and all that foolishness that was going on last year, because now you're wasting money. And because this thing could go either way. Chinese people could say uncle and say, well, look, you know, let's not take it any further. We'll figure something out. Or it could be us if the American people start, you know, with a loud enough outcry and say, hey, you know, we can't afford it anymore. We're losing jobs left and right. The cost of living is not keeping up with our wages. Just keep your ears open on what's going on. And please don't tuck your head in the sand and, you know, go under the false illusion like, you know, these things are actually going on won't affect me, because I promise you they will. And with that, I'll see you at the next one.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. Anxiety, filling up every space, no privacy.